Good morning, Team Dominator members. This is a live emergency update as Hurricane Lee reached Category 5 overnight last night. It's incredible how the HAFS-B model forecasted that rapid intensification. The minimum pressure bottomed out at about 926 millibars overnight. The storm has since encountered a little bit of wind shear, so it has leveled off the intensification trend just a little bit. Latest Hurricane Hunter aircraft sampled about a 940 millibar central pressure, so it is filling in just a little bit as it's encountering a bit of wind shear, and the morning hurricane models do show just a little bit of a leveling off of that intensification trend before likely making another run at Category 5. But this shows you the satellite imagery from overnight last night, just prior to 6Z. When it reached near peak intensity at Category 5, you could see a very well-defined eye. And that eye got down to about 10 nautical miles as sampled by Hurricane Hunter aircraft. The heroes out there that are providing that very important data that you can initialize the new models with and get a more accurate representation of the near and long-term forecast. But there you can see the satellite imagery, beautiful satellite imagery. You've seen a lot of that so far being posted all over the place, making a run at Category 5 last night. And as I mentioned, the Hurricane Hunter aircraft have been responsible for documenting this rapid intensification trend, and they sampled that eye overnight last night. And you could definitely see lightning inside that stadium effect. There are some amazing Twitter accounts to follow from the Hurricane Hunter aircraft that really show you just incredible imagery from inside the eye. And this shows you the hurricane recon data that got down to about 926 millibars. The current mission that's in there right now, they're going right through the center. This is a low-level recon, and it shows that the central pressure has filled in just a little bit to about 940 millibars. I was waiting for a couple more passes to see if maybe they just didn't sample the absolute minimum inside of the eye. But satellite imagery, latest satellite imagery does support a little bit of a weakening trend, maybe down to a Category 4 just because of that wind shear that it's encountered. This is some pretty incredible data from early this morning, just before sunrise out there, and you can see that minimum pressure dropping down to about 926 millibars, 10 nautical mile wide eye. That's a very compact eye, but they can actually get smaller than that. Hurricane Wilma actually got down to about a 2 nautical mile wide eye at peak intensity as the central pressure dropped below 900 millibars. A dreaded pinhole eye with Hurricane Wilma becoming one of the most powerful hurricanes in the Atlantic basin. And the maximum winds ever recorded are with Hurricane Allen, and that was up to 190 mile per hour sustained. Some of the intensity forecasts show that Hurricane Lee could even make a run at that, but with a little bit of wind shear, likely due to El Nino conditions in the tropical Pacific, Eastern Pacific, that might even delay or hamper that intensification just a little bit. But look at this harrowing experience inside the eye. The Hurricane Hunter aircraft actually free fell 50, look at that right there, 50 millibars down, so you can kind of see, looks like there was a free fall in altitude actually. There you can see the altitude that came down a little bit. There's a pressure on the left axis. You can definitely see the altitude on the right. It looks like a 500-foot free fall right inside of the eye there, right in the middle of it as they went through that at peak intensity. So those are definitely heroes out there, the Hurricane Hunter aircraft providing that incredible data out there. And I wanted to show you the 12Z run from yesterday of the hurricane analysis and forecast system here, the HAFS Model B, that did an incredible job at documenting the intensification trend. And in fact, some of the earlier model runs even showed it happening a little bit more slowly. But this shows the initialization at 979 millibars from yesterday morning. And we could step forward in time and just watch this thing ramp up. And what an incredible job that it did there. It's down to 933 millibars. That was as of last night at about 10 p.m. as it was making a run to Category 5. You can see that eye constrict. And look at that, down to 912 millibars. It did show a little bit more intensification than what actually happened because this hurricane did start to encounter just a little bit of weak wind shear as it moved through that portion of the Atlantic. But you can see an incredible sight here. This is on Twitter. Flynonymous WX, Fly Anon. It's a Hurricane Hunter aircraft. Look, and you could see that lightning that was happening inside of the stadium effect eye wall there with Hurricane Lee near peak intensity. You can see stars coming through that, but definitely follow this account on X. Just an incredible look at that stadium effect eye that was happening. And here are some of the latest hurricane models too. The 12Z run does show a little bit of a weakening trend during the day today over the next 24 to 48 hours as it's encountering a little bit of wind shear, but then it looks like in the 60 to 84 hour time frame, it might even make another run at Category 5 before it starts to move over some cooler water to the west of Bermuda. But a lot of these forecast models now that are coming out curve this to the north, just to the west of Bermuda, and you can see this big trough that builds into the northeast U.S. That is going to be the saving grace a bit for the North Carolina Outer Banks through the Mid-Atlantic, but you got to still watch out for this up near New England. This is the 6Z GFS run last night, and you can definitely see the ridging that tries to develop upstream of this system. You've got two big-time tropical cyclones out in the open Atlantic with a ridge right in between them. And for the near term, it looks like Hurricane Lee is going to continue its west-northwesterly motion on the south side of that ridge. And then you're going to have a weakness in the ridge that'll develop ahead of the trough over the northeastern U.S. And that's going to encourage that northward curve. And a lot of these models are still showing as the system fills in a little bit and the wind field expands, especially on the east side. You can see these big winds on the east side as the system lifts off to the north and starts to experience some of that wind shear. The expanding wind field of the tropical system as it comes up toward Nova Scotia could be a big problem, could lead to a big storm surge up there, and it's possible that it could even impact portions of eastern Maine. The 6C GFS model, we're showing a little bit further west even of the of Hurricane Lee as it approaches New England. Nevertheless, such a close pass to the east coast here is going to cause big waves. So the waves with this system as it expands are going to be up to 40 to 50 feet out in the open Atlantic, and a big wave generator like that is going to lead to coastal flooding, even from the North Carolina Outer Banks all the way through the Mid-Atlantic. Cape Cod's going to have a big coastal flood situation from those waves and the surf alone. But depending on how far west the inner core of that hurricane goes, I wouldn't be surprised if Nova Scotia end up out there at least toward late next week, like Thursday, Friday. That system could be coming up toward the Nova Scotia area. So watch out. Nova Scotia up toward Newfoundland as well could have some big problems. And we can look at the overnight European model, at least the one that goes out far enough. And let's see what the European model is showing here for Hurricane Lee from last night. And of course, we're waiting for that new guidance that's going to come out here in several hours. But there you can see the European model, the operational European from last night. Shows a little bit further east of a solution, curving out to sea just shy of Nova Scotia. This would be a good situation for Nova Scotia if it does just head out to sea. You can see it's a much weaker system, encountering a lot of wind shear as it slides off to the north. Here you can see the big high off to the south of it by this time. So very likely, that's last night's run. And right now it's passing just on the southern periphery of this subtropical anticyclone. There's the high pressure. So the steering flows from east to west. And then once it gets just to the west of Bermuda, it should start to experience a weakness of that ridge just to the north of it. And that'll curve it off to the north. And most of the models do take it just to the west of Bermuda. Still got to watch it in Bermuda. These tropical systems always end up causing some surprises. And Bermuda's located right about there to the north of the system. By Saturday, it's going to be passing to the north of the Lesser Antilles, north of Puerto Rico. Definitely dodging a bullet with such an intense system like this. But look at that high pressure to the north of it. That's going to prolong that westerly motion. And that's going to be the saving grace for Bermuda, likely dodging a bullet out there, because this would obviously be a very intense hurricane. There is some cooler water near and to the west of Bermuda from Hurricane Franklin recently, and so once the storm does turn north, it's going to start experiencing some increasing wind shear and also some cooler waters. But when it's just about even with Bermuda Sunday night into Monday morning, still has this dominant subtropical anticyclone just to the north of it that should encourage that speed off to the west. But as this high pressure weakens off to the north of that system, it's going to cause a slowdown in speed. This is probably when it's going to be reaching near peak intensity once again early next week, especially for about 75 to 84 hours. It'll probably make another run at Category 5. But eventually it's going to start to experience a breakdown in that ridge, on the west side of that ridge, and that's going to cause that curve off to the north. It's going to continue to slow down. The weakness in the ridge is right about here on the west side, and it's also going to slide a little bit to the east of the tropical system, and that's going to cause Hurricane Lee to begin that northward motion, and it's going to happen very slowly too. You can see this big trough that builds into the eastern U.S. That should save the East Coast, North Carolina Outer Banks up through the Mid-Atlantic, but up in New England and Nova Scotia still could be in line for impacts from the system toward the end of next week. That'd be like Friday into Saturday. All depends on how progressive and this upper trough is in the northeastern U.S., how fast it is, and also the ridge off to the east. And even this other tropical system is playing a role in how the steering flow is going to evolve with this system. It's going to start to encounter some bigger wind shear too, so that's going to weaken the hurricane, but the wind field is going to rapidly expand. And you've got this squeeze play between an anticyclone off to the east, the trough in the northeastern U.S., and that should funnel the system up close to Nova Scotia toward the end of next week. The European model then bends it off to the right, just shy of Nova Scotia. But with this hurricane passing this close to the North Carolina Outer Banks and the Mid-Atlantic, it's definitely going to lead to some surf. But there's last night's European model. And here is the GFS, a lot different. It basically has a weaker trough in the northeastern U.S. that flattens out a bit. Definitely the ridge upstream of it becomes negatively tilted and expands with that warm advection of tropical origin with Hurricane Lee. Sometimes it'll cause, especially later in the season, like with Superstorm Sandy, it'll cause this trough to go negatively tilted and you'll get a buckling of the upper level pattern, and that can actually bend it back and retrograde the system back into the northeastern U.S. But I don't see that happening with this one, but it could just funnel due north right up to Nova Scotia, just like the last night's GFS, the 6Z GFS was showing as well. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, Team Dominator members. It looks like I might have by accident done, and definitely a lot of spread too with that 0Z GFS model run. Looking at the 6Z run, there you can see a little bit more agreement by next Friday night. A couple of them take it right up toward Nova Scotia. It has like a 976, 959, 967 member, but a majority of the ensemble members with the GFS are a little bit slower, but they do take it right up toward Nova Scotia. So the GFS ensemble definitely shows impacts in Nova Scotia and of course Newfoundland. This is a very storm surge prone area, and with the forecast models showing 40 to 50 foot wave heights as the storm intensifies and as the wind field expands, all of that is going to come right up toward this area. Potentially could be a devastating storm surge if the GFS model verifies, and you can see a couple of members even further west still out with this. And here's the latest satellite as well from Hurricane Lee, kind of showing how it's beginning to look a little bit asymmetric. You can see that the outflow pattern is also a little bit asymmetric aloft. Usually what happens with these heat engines, these powerful tropical cyclones, is of course you have the cyclonic spin in the low levels of the atmosphere, and then aloft you get this anticyclonic outflow pattern, and you can get some banding in the outflow pattern as well with the very intense systems. Of course, this outflow looks very healthy. It doesn't look as healthy as it did last night with the Category 5 hurricane. You can see that maybe it's encountering just a little bit of wind shear out here, but the eye is still very compact, just wobbling around in there. But you can see that the inner core of the hurricane isn't quite as organized as it was last night. And of course, the other things that can impact the intensity of this hurricane are internal dynamics, eye wall replacement cycles. As of last night, the Hurricane Hunter aircraft did not show any concentric eye walls, just the one dominant eye wall with a 10 nautical mile wide eye. And that shows that it was still a very healthy storm. And sometimes when they undergo the eye wall replacement cycles, it'll cause a little bit of a temporary weakening, and then they'll ramp back up as that outer eye wall constricts, squeezes out the former inner eye wall. I don't think that there's an eye wall replacement cycle happening. Sometimes when they encounter some increased wind shear, it can almost excite an eye wall replacement, but still looks like a very powerful hurricane in there. A little bit weaker than it was last night, and you can definitely see it on visible satellite that the eye did try to cloud over just a little bit, but now it sure does look quite visible in there. The convection looks very healthy as well, so I think it's going to weaken just a little bit over the next 24 to 48 hours, as you can see with the latest hurricane model forecast. Tropicaltidbits.com is an incredible place to access this model data, but it looks like this model's picking up on the little temporary weakening trend that might happen with this model through about 24 to 48 hours before possibly making another run at Category 5 as it's well south of Bermuda, when the system starts to stall out and then begins to feel out that weakness in the ridge off to its north. I don't think that we've seen the peak intensity likely of Hurricane Lee yet, but at least in the short term, it does look like it might temporarily weaken, and the official guidance does show that as a Cat 4, of course, now, because of the latest recon data. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here. These are the latest hurricane models, the spaghetti plots too, showing that curve off to the north, a gradual decrease in speed as well, and you can see the official guidance just right in the middle of that. There's Bermuda, so it is going to pass safely to the west of Bermuda. You'll likely get some big waves out there, of course. Definitely get some big waves in the North Carolina Outer Banks. And my chase plan is just to continue to monitor this hurricane, and eventually I'll likely end up, if the GFS model verifies, there's a very high likelihood that I'll end up in Nova Scotia toward the end of next week. That would be Friday, Saturday, potentially. I do want to look at the latest HAFS-B model, see if the run from 6Z last night. Did a pretty good job with the initialization, 6Z. And it actually showed that filling in a little bit as well of the hurricane, getting exposed a little bit on the east side, the convection eroding a bit from the wind shear. This HAFS-B model, which is a new suite of models that came into operation this year, has done an incredible job at the intensification of this hurricane. And it looks like 42 to 48 hours is going to make another run at Category 5. And it looks like it'll intensify once again. So it's very possible that by Sunday into Monday, we see this making another run at Category 5. And it might even breach the 926 millibar minimum pressure that happened last night when it made a run at Category 5. But it is back down to a Category 4, it appears, based on the latest hurricane reconnaissance data. This is the latest mission, and it looks like it sampled a near 940 millibar central pressure, so it is showing you that weakening trend. You can also monitor this data on the tropicaltidbits.com website. Dr. Levi Cohen is an incredible resource out there. Show you the official NHC forecast as well. This is the 5 a.m. earlier. It's Category 5. Central pressure down to 926 millibars. So once that new update comes in, I do think it's encountering a little bit of wind shear. That'll bring it back down to a Category 4. But likely will re-intensify as it passes to the south of Bermuda early next week. It is going to slow down its speed Sunday into Monday, and that's when this thing will make another run at Category 5. And then it's going to begin that slow curve off to the north. 165 mile per hour maximum sustained winds as of the 5 a.m. advisory. Just incredible. AccuWeather does their own forecast intensity cone and track and they had it at Category 5, and it happened a lot faster than any of the projections were showing. In about a 12-hour period, it went from basically 979 millibars to 926 millibar central pressure. So the National Hurricane Center is probably going to have to adjust this a little bit to show the little bit of a weakening trend that's going to happen with this cyclone. But then it'll probably make another run at the Category 5. And here again is the satellite from last night, showing you in all its Category 5 glory. Beautiful textbook heat engine there. These are very important on our planet for transporting heat from the very warm ocean surface to aloft in the atmosphere and from the tropics and subtropics up toward the poles. So the heat engines here play a vital role in the transport of heat across planet Earth. And that's through latent heat release. There's a ton of condensation in all the convection around these storms. And as those updrafts in the convection lead to condensation, the phase change of water, it releases that stored heat energy in the water molecule as latent heat. That leads to surface pressure falls. You get more convergence at the low levels, more deeper, stronger, more healthy convection that leads to more latent heat, and that causes the system just to bomb out like they do, the positive feedbacks with these hurricanes. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Team Dominator members, for tuning into these weather reports. Thank you for making these weather reports possible. I'm likely going to be heading up toward Nova Scotia if the GFS models are right. If the European model is right and it curves out to sea just shy of Nova Scotia, then it may not be a chase opportunity at all. But I'm just going to continue to monitor it. We'll be watching this thing through the weekend, through next week, and I'll definitely let you know if there are any changes. Please dominate that subscribe button. I'll continue doing these live updates as well, and we will get that information to you as it changes. But right now, a majority of those forecast models early next week show it following that weakness in the ridge to the west of Bermuda, to the east of the North Carolina Outer Banks, and possibly up toward New England to Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, depending on which models you believe. The GFS model definitely has it headed up toward Nova Scotia Friday, Saturday with a dangerous storm surge and damaging winds out there. European model, though, does curve it out to sea a little bit earlier. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to these weather reports. And remember those 3